My name doesn't matter yet. What matters is this. I spent 31 years of my life reading other people's financial statements for a living. I learned to see the truth hiding underneath the numbers people wanted me to believe. I thought that made me careful. I thought that made me safe. I was wrong, because the fraud that emptied my life savings didn't come from a stranger on the phone, and it didn't come through some email I clicked by mistake. It came from across my own daughter's dinner table. It came from a man who had called me Walter for 6 years, who sat in my living room on Christmas mornings, who held my granddaughter on his shoulders at the county fair, and on an ordinary Sunday evening in October, that man texted himself a warning 30 seconds before he told me to check my bank account, already knowing exactly what I would find. Let me tell you something nobody warns you about when your daughter brings home a man who seems too good to be true. He doesn't show his hand early. He waits. He becomes part of the family photographs, part of the holiday table, part of the small talk by the mailbox on Sunday mornings. And by the time you understand what he really is, he has already had years of access to everything you built. My name is Walter Hensley. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a loan officer at First Merit Bank downtown, reviewing files, approving mortgages, denying the ones that didn't add up. I retired 5 years ago with a full pension and $286,000 in savings, money my late wife, Margaret, and I built dollar by dollar, missed vacation by missed vacation, so that our daughter's family would never have to worry, and so that I would never become a burden to anyone. Margaret passed 3 years ago. Cancer. Quiet, slow, and then all at once. Since then, Sunday dinner at my daughter Claire's house has been the one night of the week I don't eat alone. I look forward to it the way some men look forward to fishing, or church, or the ball game. It is the thing that gets me through the other 6 days. That Sunday started like every other one. I pulled into Claire's driveway at 6 o'clock sharp, a bottle of the sparkling grape juice Ivy likes tucked under my arm because my granddaughter is 12 and doesn't drink wine yet, but she likes to feel included when the adults toast to something. Claire opened the door before I even knocked. She always does that. She says she watches for my headlights. Hey, Dad. She hugged me the way she's hugged me since she was small enough to fit against my hip. Dinner's almost ready. Derek's just finishing up a call. Derek, my son-in-law, 6 years married to my daughter, investment consultant, or so he tells people at parties, though I have never once heard him explain, in plain language, what that actually means. He drives a car that costs more than the first house Margaret and I bought in 1986. He wears a watch that costs more than my monthly pension. I used to ask Claire how they afforded the life they lived. She'd smile that same smile she's had since she was 6 years old, the one that means she doesn't want to talk about it, and say, Dad, don't worry about it. Derek's good with money. I was good with money too. That was my entire career, but I minded my business. I never once asked to see their books. That was my mistake, and I didn't know it yet. We sat down to dinner, roast chicken, the good napkins, a candle burning in the middle of the table even though the sun hadn't gone down. Ivy sat beside me, telling me about a science project on volcanoes, her hands moving in the air the way they do when she's excited about something. Derek sat across from me with his phone resting face up next to his plate, the way people do now, like it's just another fork. I want you to understand something about that dinner table. It looked like every other Sunday I'd had there for 6 years. Nothing about it warned me. Halfway through the meal, Derek's phone buzzed against the tablecloth. He glanced down at it and something moved across his face. Quick, gone almost before it started. But I have spent 30 years across a desk from people trying to hide something. I know what worry looks like when a man is fighting to keep it off his face. He picked up the phone, typed something with his thumbs, set it back down. Then, without looking up from his plate, he said, Walter, you should check your bank account, like right now. I set my fork down slowly. Why would I do that? Just trust me. Check it. Claire looked between us. Derek, what's going on? Nothing, he said too quickly. I saw something on the news. Some kind of system issue hitting a bunch of regional banks. I'm just being cautious. Better safe than sorry, right? I did not believe him, not for 1 second. 31 years in banking teaches you what people sound like right before they tell you your money is gone. System issue is what people say when they need 3 more seconds to decide how much of the truth they're willing to give you. I don't normally bring my phone to the table. Margaret always said phones don't belong where food is, and I've kept that rule even after she was gone, like it was one more small way of keeping her with me. But something in my chest had gone cold and tight, and I needed to know. I pulled out my phone. Claire watched me. Even Ivy had gone quiet, the way children do when they feel a room change before they understand why. I opened the banking app. It took a moment to load, that small spinning circle stretching into something that felt much longer than it was, 142.18. I stared at the number, certain I had opened the wrong account. Checking, not savings. But no, this was the account, the one that had held, as of Friday afternoon, $286,000. Every dollar I had saved across 3 decades of work. Money meant for Ivy's college. Money meant for my own care if I ever needed it. Money meant to be left behind when I was gone, so my daughter would never have to carry that weight alone. Dad? Claire's voice had changed. What is it? I couldn't answer right away. I turned the phone around and set it on the table, screen facing her so she could see it herself. Her hand went to her mouth. Oh my God, is the app broken? That can't be right. I looked at Derek. He was not looking at the phone. He was looking at Claire, and there was something in his face I recognized immediately, because I had seen it 100 times across my desk over 31 years. It was the look of a man who already knew the answer, and was deciding, in real time, how much of the truth he could afford to give away. Derek, I said, keeping my voice level, the same voice I used to use with a client who'd missed 3 payments and was about to lie to me about why. How did you know to tell me to check my account 30 seconds after your phone buzzed? I told you. I saw something on the news. That's not what I asked you. Ivy's eyes moved between the 3 of us, her chicken untouched, her fork resting against the plate. Sweetheart, Claire said, forcing calm into her voice that I could hear straining at the edges. Why don't you go watch something in the living room for a little while? Ivy hesitated. She looked at her father for a long moment, a look I would think about for weeks afterward, the look of a child measuring an adult and finding something missing. And then she slid off her chair and left the room. The second she was gone, I turned back to Derek. I want a straight answer. Right now. Walter, I don't know what happened to your account. I swear to you. Then why did you know to warn me before I noticed anything myself? He didn't answer that. He picked up his water glass instead, like it might buy him a few more seconds. Claire's voice cracked. Derek, answer him. It's probably a bank error, he said. These things happen sometimes. You should call the fraud line first thing tomorrow. I have spent 31 years listening to people lie to me about money, and I know the sound of it. The pauses in the wrong places, the over-explaining, the way a person's eyes move when they're building a story instead of remembering one. Derek was building a story right in front of me, one shaky piece at a time, and he was not nearly as good at it as he believed. I did not argue with him at that table. I have learned, over a long life, that the moment you corner a guilty man in front of witnesses is the moment he stops thinking and starts fighting. I needed him calm. I needed him comfortable. I needed him to believe for a little while longer that I hadn't already understood exactly what he'd done. So I nodded slowly, the way I used to nod at a client I had already decided to deny. You're probably right, I said. I'll call the bank in the morning. I watched his shoulders loosen. He believed me. That was his second mistake. His first mistake was thinking that a retired loan officer, a man who had spent 31 years reading financial statements the way other men read the sports page, would not notice $286,000 disappearing from his account on a quiet Sunday evening. We finished the meal in a silence that Claire tried twice to fill and gave up on both times. Ivy came back near the end, sensing the storm had passed, though she kept glancing at her father with a wariness I had never seen in her before, like she was recalculating something about him in real time. At the door, I hugged Claire longer than usual. I hugged Ivy longer still. Derek shook my hand and his palm was damp. Get some rest, Walter, he said. I'm sure it's nothing. I'm sure, I said. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, my mind working the way it used to work over a loan file that didn't add up. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, I already had the beginning of a plan. Not for revenge, not yet, just for the truth. I needed to know where my money had gone, who had moved it, and how long this had been happening before tonight ever forced it into the light. I sat down at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, the same kind I used for 31 years at the bank. and at the top of the page I wrote one sentence. Derek knew before I did. Beneath it, I wrote a second sentence, the one that would guide everything I did over the weeks that followed. Find out how long. Sleep much that night. I kept seeing the look on Ivy's face when she left the table. A 12-year-old girl understanding something was wrong before any of the adults in the room were willing to say it out loud. And I kept thinking about Claire, about 6 years of her defending Derek to me, telling me not to worry, telling me he was good with money. He was good with money. Just never mind. The days after that dinner moved slower than any days I could remember. I have lived through a lot of hard stretches in my life. Burying my parents, losing Margaret, sitting across from families losing their homes when I had to deny their loan extensions. But there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from smiling at someone across a table while your mind is doing math you don't want to be doing. Monday morning, I called the bank the moment they opened. I sat in the small glass office of a fraud specialist named Rosa Delgado, a woman maybe 35 years old with tired eyes and a coffee cup that said "World's Oakiest Mom." She pulled up my account on her monitor and turned it slightly so I could see. "Mr. Hensley, I'm showing 6 transfers over the last 14 months, she said, all to the same external account. Small amounts at first, $800, then $200, then larger ones. The last one 3 days ago was 214 months, I repeated. Yes, sir. I felt something in my chest go very still, the way a room goes still right before a storm hits. 14 months. That was longer than I had let myself imagine the night before. I had been hoping, foolishly, that this was something recent, a moment of desperation, a mistake made once and regretted. 14 months was not desperation. 14 months was a plan. Whose account did the money go to? I asked. Rosa hesitated. The way people do when they know a piece of information is about to change someone's life. I can't disclose the receiving account holder's name directly, Mr. Hensley, but I can tell you the transfers were authorized using your online banking credentials, your username, your password, your security questions. I never gave anyone my password. Do you have anyone who knows your mother's maiden name? Your first pet? The kinds of things used for security questions? I sat with that question for a long moment. Family gatherings, holiday dinners, 6 years of small conversations at Claire's kitchen table, Derek asking easy, friendly questions the way people do when they're getting to know you. What was your first car, Walter? Where'd you grow up? What was your mom's maiden name? Just curious genealogy stuff. I had answered every one of those questions happily. I had thought he was being a good son-in-law, taking an interest in my life. I understand. I told Rosa. She filed a fraud report. She told me it would take time, that the receiving bank would need to be contacted, that if the funds had already been moved again, converted, transferred to a third account, withdrawn as cash, recovery would become much harder. She told me this gently, the way you tell someone that a surgery didn't go the way anyone hoped. I thanked her and walked out into the parking lot and sat in my car for 11 minutes before I could make myself start the engine. I want to tell you about Claire, because you need to understand her before you understand what happened next. Claire was born when Margaret and I were both 31 years old, after 4 years of trying and 2 losses that we never talked about with anyone outside our marriage. She was the kind of child who noticed when other people were sad before they said anything. In 3rd grade, she gave her lunch to a boy whose family didn't have enough, and did it quietly enough that his pride was never touched. That is who she has always been. Soft in the places most people go hard. She met Derek at 26, at a work conference in Charlotte. She called me the next week, her voice full of something I hadn't heard from her since college. Dad, I met someone. He's different. I remember asking her what made him different. He listens, she said. He actually listens. I believed her. I still believe that Derek listened to Claire. I just didn't understand yet what he was listening for. They married 18 months later. Margaret was still alive then, still strong enough to help pick out the flowers, still strong enough to cry through the whole ceremony the way mothers do. I remember Derek's toast at the reception, how he talked about family, about how he'd never really had one growing up, bounced around between relatives after his parents split, and how marrying into the Hensley family felt like coming home. I remember thinking, that's a good man, a man grateful for what he's been given. I did not understand back then that gratitude and hunger can look identical from the outside. Ivy came 2 years into the marriage. I was there at the hospital, pacing the hallway the way fathers and grandfathers have paced hospital hallways for 100 years. And when they let me in to see her, small and red-faced and furious at the world the way all newborns are, something in my chest rearranged itself permanently. Margaret held her first. Then Claire put her in my arms, and I remember Derek standing in the corner of the room, watching, with an expression I couldn't read at the time. I know now what that expression was. I just didn't have the right word for it yet. Over the years, Derek became part of the fabric of our family, the way sons-in-law do. He came to my retirement party and made a toast about my 3 decades of integrity in a business that doesn't always reward it. He drove me to my cardiologist appointments after Margaret got too sick to do it herself, and I was grateful for that, genuinely grateful, because a man doesn't forget who shows up for him. He also, I would later learn, used those same car rides to ask me easy, friendly questions about my accounts, about how retirement savings worked, what kind of returns I was getting, whether I trusted my financial advisor or handled things myself. I handle it myself, I told him once, proud of that fact. 31 years in banking, Derek. I don't need anyone managing my money for me. He'd smiled and said, "Smart man. Most people your age get taken advantage of. Good thing you're sharp." I think about that conversation more than almost any other memory I have of him now. "Good thing you're sharp," he said it while he was already inside my accounts. The week after my visit to the bank, Claire called me every day. Sometimes, twice, Dad. I talked to Derek again. He says he doesn't know anything. He thinks maybe it's identity theft. Someone got your information somehow. Claire, I know, Dad. I know how it looks. But I've been married to him for 6 years. I would know if I would have seen something. I didn't argue with her on the phone. I have learned in my life that you cannot talk a person out of a belief they need in order to keep standing up straight. Claire needed to believe her husband was innocent, the way a person standing on ice needs to believe it will hold. I understood that. I had built my own version of that ice once, telling myself Derek was simply a private person about money, that his silence about his work was just modesty. We build the ice we need. But underneath the phone calls, I was working. I spent that week doing what I used to do for a living, pulling records, cross-referencing dates, building a timeline. I requested 14 months of statements from the bank. I sat at my kitchen table every night with the legal pad and a highlighter, marking every transfer, every date, every small amount that had crept out of my account like water, finding a crack in a foundation. The pattern told a story on its own, the way patterns always do if you're patient enough to let them. The first transfer, 14 months ago, was for $800. It happened 3 days after a Sunday dinner where I had complained lightly about a plumbing repair that had cost more than I expected. Small talk, nothing important. Except 2 days later, $800 had moved out of my account, an amount close enough to what I'd mentioned that it couldn't be a coincidence. The second transfer, 2 months after that, was for $200. It happened the week after I'd mentioned, at another dinner, that I was thinking about helping pay for Ivy's summer camp. Each transfer lined up, almost perfectly, with a conversation. Each amount tracked close to something I had casually mentioned, wanting to spend, or worrying about, or planning for. It was as if someone had been listening very carefully to every word I said at that dinner table, filing it away, and quietly taking a piece of it for himself before I ever got the chance. I sat with that realization for a long time on a Thursday night, the kitchen dark except for the lamp over the table, and I felt something shift in me. Not rage, not yet. Something colder and more useful than rage. The same feeling I used to get at the bank when a file crossed my desk that everyone else had signed off on, but something in the numbers told me not to. I picked up my pen and wrote a third line on the legal pad, underneath the first 2. This wasn't one mistake. This was a system. That Friday, it rained the way it does in the Carolinas in October. Sudden, heavy, gone within an hour, leaving the whole world smelling like wet leaves and cold concrete. I drove to Claire's house without calling first, something I never do. I told myself I wanted to see Ivy. That was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. Claire answered the door with flour on her hands, in the middle of making Ivy's favorite cookies, and for a moment, standing there in the doorway with the rain still coming down behind me, I almost turned around and left. She looked so much like her mother in that moment, the same tilt of the head, the same soft worry in her eyes. that I lost my nerve. "Dad, you're soaked. Come in. Is Derek home?" Something crossed her face. "He's at the gym." "Why?" "I want to talk to you. Just you." We sat at her kitchen table, the same table where everything had come apart the week before, and I laid it out for her as gently as I knew how. The 14 months, the pattern, the amounts that lined up with our conversations like a key fitting a lock. I watched her face change as I spoke, watched the ice she'd been standing on start to crack piece by piece. "Dad, stop," she said finally, her voice thin. "Please stop. I'm not trying to hurt you, Claire." "Then why does it feel like you're trying to destroy my marriage?" I reached across the table and took her flowered hand in mine, the way I used to when she was small and scared of something in the dark. "I'm not trying to destroy anything," I said. "I'm trying to find out the truth before it destroys you first." She pulled her hand back, slowly, and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not exactly, but something close to it, tangled up with fear and love, and a refusal to see what was standing right in front of her. "You don't know him the way I do," she said. "You're right," I said quietly. "I don't. Not yet." Outside, the rain had started again, tapping soft and steady against the kitchen window, and somewhere upstairs I could hear Ivy's footsteps moving across her bedroom floor, unaware that the ground beneath her family had already begun to shift. I left Claire's house that evening without cookies, without resolution, and without my daughter's trust. At least not fully, not yet. But I left with something else, something that mattered more in that moment. I left with a date, October 14th, the day of the $214,000 transfer. The day everything had accelerated from careful and small to fast and desperate. Something had changed for Derek recently. Something had made him move from stealing quietly to stealing everything, all at once, like a man who knew his window was closing. I needed to find out what that something was. And I had a feeling, driving home through the rain with my hands tight on the wheel, that I already knew where to start looking. I have always believed that if you want to understand what a man is hiding, you don't look at what he's spending. You look at what he's afraid of losing. That thought stayed with me all weekend, turning over and over the way a stone turns in a tumbler, wearing itself smooth. Derek didn't need my money. His car alone was worth more than most people's houses. His watch, his suits, the country club membership. Claire mentioned once at dinner, like it was nothing. None of that suggested a man in financial trouble. It suggested a man performing wealth, and men who perform wealth are usually running from something underneath it. I called an old colleague from the bank, a man named Sal Ferraro, who'd moved over to the fraud investigations unit before he retired 2 years after me. Sal still had contacts. Sal still knew how to pull threads that weren't supposed to be pulled by an ordinary retired loan officer. "Walter Hensley," he said when he picked up. "Still alive, huh?" "Barely. I need a favor, Sal." I told him everything. The dinner, the transfers, the 14 months, the acceleration. Sal went quiet on the other end of the line the way he used to go quiet at his desk, right before he found something ugly in a file. "Send me what you've got," he said. "And Walter, if this is what it sounds like, you're not going to like what's underneath it." 2 days later, I sat across from an attorney named Priya Chandrasekhar, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s who specialized in elder financial fraud. Claire had recommended her once, years ago, for a neighbor's estate dispute, never imagining her own father would sit in that same chair for a very different reason. "Mr. Hensley, based on what you've described, this has the fingerprints of a long-term skimming operation," Priya said, flipping through the printed statements I'd brought her. "The small early transfers, the pattern matching your conversations, the acceleration at the end, that's not impulsive theft. That's someone managing a slow bleed and then panicking. Panicking about what?" She looked up at me. "That's the question you need answered before we file anything. Because right now, this looks clean and provable. The moment you confront him, or the moment he suspects you're building a case, he has every incentive to disappear that money permanently, or worse, disappear himself." I sat with that for a long moment. "What do you mean, worse?" "I mean, men who steal like this rarely stop with one victim, Mr. Hensley. If he's been bleeding you for 14 months to cover something, I'd want to know what else he's touched. Business partners, other family, Claire's own accounts." That last sentence landed in my chest like a dropped stone. I hadn't thought, until that moment, about Claire's own money, her savings. The joint accounts she shared with a man she trusted completely, Sal called me back 4 days later, on a Tuesday night, while I was standing at my own kitchen sink washing a single plate and a single fork, the way I ate most nights now. "Walter, you need to sit down. I'm standing at my sink, Sal. Just tell me, Derek Whitfield isn't licensed. Not as an investment consultant, not as anything. I ran him through every registry, SEC, FINRA, state licensing boards, nothing. Whatever he's telling people he does for a living, it isn't real. Not legally, anyway." I set the plate down slowly in the drying rack. "Then where's the money coming from? The car, the house they're renovating, the country club. That's the part you're not going to like," Sal said. I did some digging into public records. Derek Whitfield has 3 prior addresses in 2 different states in the last 12 years, all under slightly different versions of his name. Derek Whitfield, D. Andrew Whitfield, Derek A. Whitfield. Each time, there's a pattern. He moves into a new city, gets close to a family with money, usually an older man, a widower, someone recently retired. Then, within 2 to 3 years, he moves again. The kitchen went very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the tick of the clock Margaret had hung above the stove 20 years ago, and I'd never had the heart to replace. Are you telling me I'm not the first? I'm telling you I found a name in Ohio. A man named Harold Voss, 73 years old, retired postal worker, filed a fraud complaint against a son-in-law matching Derek's description 8 years ago. Case went nowhere, no conviction. Voss withdrew the complaint 6 weeks after filing it. Withdrew it? Why? I don't know yet. But Walter, I think you need to find out. Because if I'm right, Claire isn't his wife. She's his cover, and Ivy isn't his daughter. She's how he stays inside a family long enough to do this properly. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen for a long time without moving. The water still running in the sink, my hands gripping the edge of the counter the way a man grips a railing on a boat in rough water. Everything I thought I understood about the last 6 years of my daughter's life had just become a question mark. I didn't tell Claire what Sal had found, not yet. I needed more than a name in Ohio and a pattern that could, in theory, be a coincidence. I needed proof, the kind that would hold up against 6 years of love and loyalty, and a little girl who called that man Daddy. But I did go to dinner that Sunday, because staying away would have told Derek something was wrong, and I needed him comfortable a little while longer. The table was set the same as always. Ivy hugged me the same as always. Derek shook my hand, and this time his palm was dry, steady, confident, the hand of a man who believed he had already weathered the worst of it. "Any news from the bank, Walter?" he asked, settling into his chair with an ease that made my stomach turn. "They're investigating," I said. "Slow process. These things always are." He shook his head with what looked, to anyone who didn't know better, like genuine sympathy. "I really hope they catch whoever did this to you." I looked at him across the table, at the candle burning between us, at my granddaughter's careful, watchful eyes moving between the adults, the way they had every Sunday since the night this began. And I thought about Harold Voss in Ohio, 73 years old, who had filed a complaint and then withdrawn it 6 weeks later. I wondered what had made him go quiet. I wondered if I was about to find out the hard way. "Derek," I said, keeping my voice light, almost casual, the tone of a man making conversation rather than laying a trap. "I've been meaning to ask, whatever happened with your job before this one? You mentioned once you worked out in Ohio for a while." It was a small thing, a throwaway question, the kind anyone might ask at a dinner table, but I watched his hand tighten, just slightly, around his fork. "Different life," he said. "Didn't work out. Why do you ask?" "No reason," I said. "Just making conversation." But Claire was watching him now too. I saw it. The small furrow in her brow, the way her eyes moved from her husband's face to mine and back again. The way a person's instincts start working even when their heart is still fighting to keep the ice from cracking. "Derek," she said slowly, "you told me you were in consulting in Ohio. Not that it didn't work out, Claire." "What didn't work out, Derek?" The table went silent. Ivy set down her fork, her eyes wide, watching her parents the way children watch a storm, approaching from a distance. Not yet close enough to be afraid, but close enough to know something is coming. Derek's jaw tightened. For the first time since I'd known him, I watched him struggle to find words, watched the easy practice charm slip for just a moment before he caught it and pulled it back into place. "I don't like where this conversation is going," he said quietly. "Neither do I," Claire said, and her voice had gone somewhere. I had never heard it go before. Cold, steady, The voice of a woman who had spent 6 years building a life on a foundation she was only now beginning to suspect was hollow. "So why don't you tell us exactly where it's going before I have to find out myself?" Derek looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at me, and for just a second, before he rearranged his face into something calm and reasonable, I saw something underneath it that I recognized instantly because I had seen it once before, weeks earlier, at this same table. It was the look of a man who was out of time. He stood up from the table slowly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor, and reached for his phone. "I need to make a call," he said. "Work thing. I'll explain everything when I get back, Derek." Claire's voice cracked. "Sit down," but he was already moving toward the front door. Phone pressed to his ear before he'd even finished dialing, his voice low and urgent as he disappeared onto the porch. Pulling the door shut behind him, through the front window, I watched him pace back and forth across the porch in the fading evening light, one hand pressed against his forehead, his voice rising and falling in a conversation none of us could hear. Claire sat frozen at the table, her hand pressed flat against her chest like she was trying to keep her own heart from climbing out of it. Ivy had gone completely still, watching her father through the glass, with an expression far too old for a 12-year-old's face. And then, through the window, I watched Derek stop pacing. I watched him go very still. I watched the phone slip slightly away from his ear as whatever he was hearing on the other end drained the color from his face. He turned and looked back at the house, not at Claire, not at Ivy, at me. And in that moment, standing frozen on his own front porch with the phone still pressed halfway to his ear, Derek Whitfield looked like a man who had just realized the ground he'd been standing on for 6 years was no longer there at all. Derek stood on that porch for what felt like a full minute, though it was probably closer to 20 seconds, the phone hanging loose in his hand, his face lit by the porch light, and whatever last color of evening remained in the sky. Claire hadn't moved from her chair. Ivy hadn't either. The three of us sat in a silence so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen behind us, the same sound I'd been hearing in my own kitchen every night for weeks. When Derek finally came back inside, he didn't sit down. He stood at the head of the table, one hand braced against the back of his chair, and I understood, watching him, that I was about to hear a version of the truth, not the whole truth. Men like Derek don't give you the whole truth even when they're cornered, but enough of it to survive the next 5 minutes. "I need everyone to stay calm," he said. "Derek." Claire's voice was very quiet. "Who was on the phone?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at Ivy and something in his face softened for just a moment, the first genuinely unguarded thing I had seen from him all evening, before he seemed to remember himself and straighten back up. "Ivy, sweetheart, can you go upstairs for a few minutes?" "No," Ivy said. "Just that. Flat and certain, the way children sometimes surprise you by refusing to be managed. I want to know what's happening." Claire reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand, and didn't ask her to leave again. Derek exhaled slowly. "Okay, there's a man named Marcus Feld. I owe him money. A lot of money. It started 3 years ago. An investment that didn't work out the way I told everyone it did. I never actually had a consulting business, Claire. I was managing money for a few people, informally, and I lost most of it in a bad position I didn't get out of in time." "How much?" Claire asked. "It doesn't matter. How much, Derek?" $400,000, give or take." The number sat in the room like something physical. I watched Claire's hand tighten around Ivy's, watched her knuckles go pale. "And my father's money," she said slowly. "That went to Marcus Feld." Derek didn't answer, which was its own answer. "You were paying off a debt with my father's retirement," Claire said, her voice climbing now, cracking around the edges. 6 years, Derek. 6 years I defended you to him. I told him he was being paranoid for even asking questions about how we afforded things," Derek said. "Once I got things stable again, I was going to put every dollar back before he even noticed." "He noticed," I said. It was the first thing I'd said since he came back inside, and both of them turned to look at me. "I noticed the first transfer 14 months ago. I just didn't say anything yet." Something shifted in Derek's face. Not surprise exactly, but the particular fatigue of a man realizing he had been underestimating his opponent the entire time. 14 months, Claire repeated, looking at me now. "Dad, you knew for 14 months? "I knew something was wrong for 14 months, I said carefully. I only understood the shape of it 2 weeks ago. Derek ran a hand through his hair, and for a moment he looked less like the polished man who'd sat across from me at 100 Sunday dinners, and more like exactly what he was. A man who had built a very expensive house on a foundation of borrowed time, and had just watched the last support beam give way. "Who was on the phone just now?" I asked him directly. "Marcus," he said. "He wants the rest of it, all 400, by the end of the month, and if you don't have it." Derek looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't performance. It was fear, real and unguarded. "Marcus doesn't run a hedge fund, Walter," he said quietly. "He runs something else, the kind of business where people don't sue you when you're late. They send someone to your house." Claire made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob, and pulled Ivy closer against her side. "You brought that into our home," she said. "You brought that near our daughter." I want to tell you what happened over the next several days, because it was not the version of justice you see in movies. There was no dramatic confrontation, no police kicking down a door. It was slower than that, and in some ways harder, because it required all of us, Claire especially, to keep functioning while the ground underneath the family kept shifting. Claire filed for a legal separation within the week. Priya, the attorney I'd hired for myself, referred her to a colleague who specialized in cases exactly like this one. Financial abuse tangled up inside a marriage, debts that weren't the innocent spouse's to inherit, but that the law doesn't always separate cleanly. Derek moved out. Not dramatically. He packed 2 suitcases on a Tuesday afternoon while Ivy was at school, and Claire stood in the doorway and watched him go, her face unreadable in a way that worried me more than tears would have. I gave Sal everything I had, and Sal gave it to a detective he trusted in the Financial Crimes Unit, a woman named Detective Renata Ochoa, sharp-eyed and unhurried in the way of someone who has learned that fraud cases take patience, not speed. She built the case slowly over the following weeks. The transfer records, the false identity documents Derek had used in 2 prior states, the complaint Harold Voss had filed and withdrawn 8 years earlier in Ohio. I called Harold Voss myself. It took some doing to find him. He'd moved twice since filing that old complaint, and I understood why the moment I finally got him on the phone. He threatened my grandson, Harold told me, his voice still carrying the particular flatness of a man who had made peace with a decision he didn't feel good about. Not directly, just made sure I knew people could get hurt if I kept pushing. I had a 9-year-old grandson at the time, Walter. I dropped the complaint the same week. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. Derek, or whoever he had been in Ohio, had learned a long time ago exactly how to make an old man go quiet. Fear works most of the time. It had worked on Harold Voss for 8 years. It was not going to work on me. 3 weeks into the investigation, on a Thursday night, I got a call from Claire at 11:40 p.m. Her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her at first. "Dad, it's Ivy. She's having chest pains. She says she can't breathe right. I don't know if it's anxiety or something real. I'm scared. Can you meet us?" I was in the car before she finished the sentence. At the hospital, I found Claire in a hallway chair outside a curtained bay, her face gray with exhaustion, and beyond the curtain I could hear a nurse's calm voice talking Ivy through slow breaths. The doctor came out 20 minutes later and told us what I think all 3 of us already suspected. It was a panic attack, not a heart problem, brought on by weeks of stress no 12-year-old should have had to carry. I sat with Ivy after they moved her to a regular room for observation. She was quiet for a long time, staring at the ceiling, her small hand resting in mine the way it used to when she was much younger and afraid of thunderstorms. "Grandpa," she said finally, "is it my fault? Because I didn't tell anyone Dad seemed weird sometimes?" Something in my chest broke open, hearing that. "No," I told her, and I made sure my voice was steady because she needed it to be steady. "None of this is your fault, Ivy. Not one piece of it. Adults are supposed to protect kids from things like this, not the other way around. You didn't fail anybody. Some grown-ups fail the people who trust them. That's on them, never on you." She nodded slowly, though I could tell she didn't fully believe me yet. That kind of belief takes time to rebuild. I knew that better than most people in that hospital room. By late November, Detective Ochoa had what she needed. Derek, whose legal name, it turned out, was actually Derek Anthony Whitfield Marsh, a detail he'd dropped somewhere between Ohio and Charlotte, was arrested on charges of wire fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation of an elderly person, a charge that carried extra weight in the state because of my age. Marcus Feld's operation turned out to be under investigation by federal authorities already, for reasons that went well beyond one son-in-law's gambling debts. Derek's arrest, as it turned out, handed investigators a thread they'd been trying to pull for over a year. Priya called me the week before Thanksgiving with an update. The bank's fraud insurance is going to cover a significant portion of what was taken, Mr. Hensley. Not all of it. Some of the funds were moved into accounts that have already been seized as part of the federal investigation, and recovery from those will take time, possibly years. But we're looking at recovering close to 60% within the next 6 months. 60%. Not everything. Nothing ever gives you everything back, I've learned. But it was more than I'd let myself hope for on that first Sunday night in October, staring at 142 Ains on a glowing phone screen while my granddaughter watched her family come apart across the dinner table. Claire came to my house the Sunday before Thanksgiving, alone this time, without Ivy. She sat at my kitchen table, my table, not hers, for the first time in longer than I could remember, and she cried in a way I hadn't seen since Margaret's funeral. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she said. "I defended him. For years, I defended him to you, and you were right, and I made you feel crazy for asking questions. You loved your husband," I said. "That's not a crime, Claire. He made sure you never had a reason to doubt him until it was almost too late. That's not a failure on your part. That's exactly what he was designed to do." How do I explain this to Ivy? How does she ever trust anyone again after this? I thought about that question for a long moment, the same question I'd been turning over myself since the night at the hospital. "You show her," I said finally. "Not with words, with time. You show her that some people leave when things get hard and some people stay and clean it up, piece by piece, even when it's exhausting. She's watching both of us right now, Claire. She's learning what trust looks like after it's been broken. Let's make sure she learns it right." Claire reached across the table and took my hand, the same way I'd taken hers weeks earlier in the rain, and for a moment neither of us said anything else. We didn't need to. Outside my kitchen window, the last of the autumn light was fading over the yard where Margaret used to grow tomatoes every summer, and somewhere in the house next door, someone was already stringing up early Christmas lights, small points of warmth against the coming dark. We had a long way to go, but for the first time in 6 weeks, it finally felt like we were walking in the same direction. Winter came early that year, the way it sometimes does in the Carolinas, catching everyone off guard with a hard frost in late November that killed the last of the marigolds along my front walk. I remember standing out there one morning in my coat, looking at the frozen flowers, thinking that some things end before you're ready for them to, and there's nothing to do but plant again in spring. The trial didn't happen the way television makes you expect trials to happen. There was no dramatic cross-examination, no moment where Derek broke down and confessed everything in front of a packed courtroom. The evidence was simply too complete for theater. Detective Ochoa's investigation, combined with the federal case against Marcus Feld's operation, had built something Derek's lawyer couldn't argue his way around. Bank records, false identity documents from 2 states, a paper trail 14 months long that matched almost exactly to conversations I had documented on a yellow legal pad. Derek pleaded guilty in February to reduce his sentence: wire fraud, identity theft, financial exploitation of an elderly person. The judge, a heavy-set man named Judge Alvarez with a slow, deliberate way of speaking, sentenced him to 7 years, with the possibility of parole after 4. I sat in the courtroom the day of sentencing, 3 rows back, with Claire beside me. Ivy stayed home with a neighbor. Some things, I believe, a 13-year-old shouldn't have to sit through, even when they involve her own father. Derek looked smaller than I remembered him. Not physically. He was the same size he'd always been, but something in the way he carried himself had changed. The confidence that used to fill up a room was gone. When the judge read the sentence, Derek turned briefly and looked at Claire. I don't know what he was hoping to see in her face. Whatever it was, he didn't find it. She looked back at him with an expression that wasn't hatred and wasn't grief anymore. It was something closer to closure, the particular calm of a person who has finally stopped waiting for an explanation that will never be good enough. He didn't look at me at all. Recovery of the money took longer than anyone promised. Priya had told me 60% within 6 months, and she came close. By the following summer, I'd recovered a little over $178,000 of the original $286,000, most of it through the bank's fraud insurance, and a portion clawed back from the federal seizure of Marcus Feld's assets. The rest, Priya told me gently, was likely gone for good, absorbed into whatever debts and disasters Derek had built around himself before I ever became one-line item in his ledger. I won't pretend the loss didn't sting. A man doesn't spend 31 years building something dollar by dollar and shrug when a third of it disappears. There were nights that spring when I sat at my kitchen table with the old legal pad, looking at the numbers, feeling something close to grief for money the way other people grieve a person. But I want to tell you what I learned, sitting at that table, because I think it matters more than the number itself. I had spent my whole career protecting other people's money. I understood interest rates, collateral, risk assessment, every mechanical piece of how wealth is built and lost. What I hadn't understood, not really, not until that year, was that the money was never actually the thing I was protecting. It was time. 31 years of getting up before dawn, of saying no to vacations, of driving the same car for 11 years so Claire could go to college without loans. Derek hadn't just stolen numbers off a screen. He'd stolen pieces of time I could never get back. But he hadn't stolen all of it, and the part that mattered most, Claire, Ivy, the family I still had left standing after the dust settled, that part he never touched at all, no matter how hard he tried. Sunday dinners started again in January, slower and quieter than before, but they started again. Claire's house felt different now. She'd repainted the dining room a soft sage green that spring, something Margaret would have loved, and taken down the photographs that included Derek, replacing them gradually with new ones. Ivy and me at the county fair, the three of us at Christmas. Small proof hung on the walls that a family can lose a piece of itself and still be a family. Ivy had a hard year. There's no honest way to tell this story without saying that plainly. She saw a therapist every other week, a kind woman named Dr. Ferris who specialized in children navigating exactly this kind of rupture. A parent who turns out to be someone other than who they claim to be. There were nights Claire called me because Ivy couldn't sleep, convinced that if her father could lie about everything, maybe everyone lied about everything. Maybe nothing was solid enough to stand on. I didn't have a fix for that. I don't think there is a fix for that, not really, not the kind that arrives all at once. But I showed up, every Sunday without fail, rain or shine, the way I had for years before any of this happened. And slowly, over months, I watched something in Ivy start to settle again. Not the same as before, but something new and maybe sturdier, built on the understanding that some people do stay, that showing up week after week means something even when, especially when the world has just taught you it might not. One Sunday in April, she asked me to help her with a school project about family history. We sat at Claire's kitchen table with an old shoebox of photographs I'd brought from my house. Pictures of Margaret, of Claire as a girl, of my own parents on their wedding day in 1954, the edges gone soft and yellow with time. "Tell me about Grandma," Ivy said, holding up a photo of Margaret laughing at something outside the frame, young and radiant in a way I hadn't seen her look at in years by the time she got sick, so I told her about how Margaret picked this house because of the light in the back windows. About the years we spent building something, dollar by dollar, so our daughter would never have to worry. About how some people spend their whole lives taking, and some people spend their whole lives building, and the hardest, most important thing in life is learning to tell the two apart before it costs you everything. Like Dad, Ivy said quietly. Not a question, a conclusion she'd been working toward on her own, in her own time, the way children eventually do. Like your dad, I agreed gently. But Ivy, you're not made of what he did. You're made of what you choose to do next. That's true for all of us. She was quiet for a long moment, turning that over the way I'd watched her turn over hard things all year, testing the weight of it. "I want to be like you and Grandma," she said finally. "The building kind, not the taking kind." I didn't trust my voice enough to answer that right away. I just squeezed her hand and let the kitchen go quiet around us. The late afternoon light coming through the window the same soft gold it had come through the night. Margaret first walked into this house and said, "This is where we raise them." I think about that Sunday dinner in October, more than I probably should. The candle burning on the table, the phone buzzing against the tablecloth, the number glowing up at me from a screen that told me, in the space of a single breath, that everything I thought I understood about my family was about to change. I used to think the worst thing that could happen to a man my age was running out of money before running out of time. I know better now. The worst thing is not knowing who's sitting across your table. The best thing, the thing that makes all the rest of it survivable, is finding out and discovering the people worth keeping were there all along, waiting for you to see them clearly. Derek is 4 years into his sentence now, up for parole soon, though none of us have any plans to be there when it happens. Claire is different than she was, steadier in some ways, softer in others, the way people get when they've survived something and decided not to let it harden them completely. She started her own small business last year, a bookkeeping service for local families, work she says she's careful about now in a way she never had to be careful about before. She jokes sometimes that she inherited her father's suspicious eye for numbers. I don't think it's entirely a joke. Ivy is 14 now, taller, sharper. She still hugs me the same way she did the night this all began, holding on a beat longer than the hug requires, and I let her every time because I understand now what I only sensed back then, that some hugs are a question and the answer they're looking for is simply, I'm still here. I am too. That's the whole of what I have to offer anyone at this point in my life. Not the money I got back, not the money I lost, but the simple stubborn fact of showing up, Sunday after Sunday for as long as I'm given. 31 years I spent reading other people's numbers for a living, believing that was the skill that mattered most. I understand now it was never the numbers. It was learning to sit across a table from someone and see, underneath everything they say, who they actually are. I got it wrong once, with a man who called me Walter for 6 years and meant none of it. I don't intend to get it wrong again.